Jhary-a-Conel. It is here. Hasten, Elric. Elric sprang up. It was dawn. He had already stood watch once during the night. He drew his black sword from its scabbard, noticing with some astonishment that Jhary-a-Conel had already drawn his own blade, and that it was almost identical to his own. There was the vanishing tower. Coram was running towards it even now. The tower was in fact a small castle of grey and solid stone, but about its battlements played lights, and its outline was not altogether clear in certain sections of its walls. Elric ran beside Jhary-a-Conel. "He keeps the door open to lure his guests in," panted the black giant. "It is our only advantage, I think." The tower flickered. "Hasten," Coram cried again, and the prince in the scarlet robe dashed into the darkness of the doorway. They ran into a small antechamber which was lit by a great oil lamp hanging from the ceiling by chains. The door closed suddenly behind them. Elric glanced at Jhary-a-Conel's tense black features, at Coram's blemished face. All had swords ready, but now a profound silence filled the hall. Without speaking, Coram pointed through a window slit. The view beyond it had changed. They seemed to be looking out over a blue sea. "Jhary," Coram called. "Jhary-a-Conel." A faint sound came back. It might have been a reply, or it might have been the squeak of a rat in the castle walls. "Jhary," Coram cried. "Voilodion gag Nazdiak. Am I to be thwarted? Have you left this place?" "I have not left it. What do you want with me?" The voice came from the next room. Wearily the three heroes, who were one hero, went forward. Something like lightning flickered in the room, and in its ghastly glare Elric saw Voilodion gag Nazdiak. He was a dwarf clad all in puffed, multicoloured silks, furs and satins, a tiny sword in his hand. His head was too large for his body, but it was a handsome head with thick black eyebrows which met in the middle. He smiled at them. "At last, someone new to relieve my ennui. But lay down your swords, gentlemen, I beg you, for you are to be my guests." "I know what fate your guests may expect," Coram said. "Know this, Voilodion gag Nazdiak. We have come to release Jhary-a-Conel, whom you hold prisoner. Give him up to us, and we will not harm you." The dwarf's handsome features grinned cheerfully at these words. "Oh, but I am very powerful. You cannot defeat me. Watch." He waved his sword, and more lightning lashed about the room. Elric half raised his sword to ward it off, but it never quite touched him. He stepped angrily towards the dwarf. "Know this, Voilodion gag Nazdiak. I am Elric of Malnobanne, and I have much power. I bear the black sword, and it thirsts to drink your soul unless you release Prince Coram's friend." Again the dwarf laughed. "Swords? What power have they?" "Our swords are not ordinary blades," Jhary-a-Conel said, "and we have been brought here by forces you could not comprehend, wrenched from our own ages by the power of the gods themselves, specifically to demand that this Jhary-a-Conel be given up to us." "You are deceived," said Voilodion gag Nazdiak, "or you seek to deceive me. This Jhary is a witty fellow, I'd agree, but what interest could gods have in him?" Elric raised Stormbringer. The black sword moaned in anticipation of a quenching. Then the dwarf produced a tiny yellow ball from nowhere and flung it at Elric. It bounced on his forehead, and he was flung backward across the room, Stormbringer clattering out of his hand. Dizzily, Elric tried to rise, reached out to take his sword, but he was too weak. On impulse he began to cry for the aid of Arioch, but then he remembered that Arioch had been banished from this world. There were no supernatural allies to call upon here, none but the sword, and he could not reach the sword. Jhary-a-Conel leapt backwards and kicked the black sword in Elric's direction. As the albino's hand encircled the hilt, he felt strength come back to him, but it was no more than an ordinary mortal strength. He climbed to his feet. Coram remained where he was. The dwarf was still laughing. Another ball appeared in his hand. Again he flung it at Elric, but this time he brought up the black sword in time and deflected it. It bounced across the room and exploded against the far wall. Something black writhed from the fire. "It is dangerous to destroy the globes," said Voilodian-Gag-Nazdiak equably, "for now what is in them will destroy you." The black thing grew. The flames died. "I am free," said a voice. "I," Voilodian-Gag-Nazdiak was gleeful, "free to kill these fools who reject my hospitality." "Free to be slain," Elric replied as he watched the thing take shape. At first it seemed all made out of flowing hair, which gradually compressed until it formed the outline of a creature with the heavily muscled body of a gorilla, though the hide was thick and watered like that of a rhinoceros. From behind the shoulders curved great black wings, and on the neck was the snarling head of a tiger. It clutched a long scythe-like weapon in its hairy hands. The tiger had roared, and the scythe swept out suddenly, barely missing Elric. Jhary-a-Conel and Coram began to move forward to Elric's aid. Elric heard Coram cry, "My eye! It will not see into the netherworld. I cannot summon help." It seemed that Coram's sorceress powers were also limited on this plane. Then Voilodian-Gag-Nazdiak threw a yellow ball at the black giant and the pale man with the jewelled hand. Both barely managed to deflect the missiles, and in so doing caused them to burst. Immediately, shapes emerged and became two more of the winged tiger men, and Elric's allies were forced to defend themselves. As he dodged another swing of the scythe, Elric tried to think of some rune which would summon supernatural aid to him, but he could think of none that would work here. He thrust at the tiger man, but his blow was blocked by the scythe. His opponent was enormously strong and swift. The black wings began to beat, and the snarling thing flapped upwards to the ceiling, hovered for a moment, and then rushed down on Elric with its scythe whirling, a chilling scream coming from its fanged mouth, its close eyes glaring. Elric felt something close to panic. Stormbringer was not supplying him with the strength he expected. Its powers were diminished on this plane. He barely managed to dodge the scythe again and lash at the creature's exposed thigh. The blade bit, but no blood came. The tiger man did not seem to notice the wound. Again it began to flap towards the ceiling. Elric saw that his companions were experiencing a similar plight. Coram's face was full of consternation, as if he had expected an easy victory, and now foresaw defeat. Meanwhile, Voilodian-Gag-Nazdiak continued to scream his glee and flung more of the yellow balls around the room. As each one burst, there emerged another snarling, winged tiger creature. The room was full of them. Elric, Jhary-a-Conel and Coram backed to the far wall as the monsters bore down on them, their ears full of fearful beating of the giant wings, the harsh screams of hatred. "I fear I have summoned you two to your destruction," Coram panted. "I had no warning that our powers would be so limited here. The tower must shift so fast that even the ordinary laws of sorcery do not apply within its walls." "They seem to work well enough for the dwarf," Elric said as he brought up his blade to block first one scythe and then another. "If I could slay but a single." His back was hard against the wall. A scythe nicked his cheek and drew blood. Another tore his cloak. They slashed his arm. The tiger faces were grinning now as they closed in. Elric aimed a blow at the head of the nearest creature, struck off its ear so that it howled. Stormbringer howled back and stabbed at the thing's throat. But the sword hardly penetrated. It served only to put the tiger man slightly off balance. As the thing staggered, Elric wrenched the scythe from its hands and reversed the weapon, drawing the blade across the chest. The tiger man screamed as blood spurted from the wound. "I was right," Elric shouted at the others. "Only their own weapons can harm them." He moved forward with the scythe in one hand and Stormbringer in the other. The tiger men backed off and then began to flap upwards to hover near the ceiling. Elric ran towards Voilodion-Gagnazdiak. The dwarf gave a yell of terror and disappeared through a doorway, too small easily to admit Elric. Then, with thundering wings, the tiger creatures descended again. This time the other two strove to capture scythes from their enemies. Driving back those who attacked him, the albino prince took Corum's main assailant from behind, and the thing fell with its head sliced off. Corum sheathed his longsword and plucked up the scythe, killing a third tiger man almost immediately, and kicking the fallen scythe towards Jhary-a-Conel. Black feathers drifted in the stinking air. The flagstones of the floor were slippery with blood. The three heroes drove a path through their enemies into the smaller room they had lately left. Still the tiger creatures came on, but now they had to pass through the door, and this was more easily defended. Glancing back, Elric saw a window slit of a tower. Outside, the scenery altered constantly as the vanishing tower continued its erratic progress through the planes of existence. But the three were wearying. All had lost some blood from minor wounds. Scythes clashed on scythes as the fight continued. Wings beat loudly, and the snarling faces spat at them and spoke words which could hardly be understood. Without the strength supplied him by his hell-forged sword, Elric was weakening rapidly. Twice he staggered and was borne up by the others. Was he to die in some alien world, with his friends never knowing how he perished? But then he remembered that his friends were even now under attack from the reptilian beasts Thalab-Ka'ana had sent against Talon Lorn. They too would soon be dead. This knowledge gave him a little more strength and enabled him to sweep his deep scythe into the belly of another tiger creature. This gap in the ranks of the sorceress things enabled him to see a small doorway on the far side of the other room. Voilodion-Gagnazdiak was crouched there, hurling still more of the yellow globes. New winged tiger men grew up to replace those who had fallen. But then Elric heard Voilodion-Gagnazdiak give a yell, and saw that something was covering his face. It was a black and white animal with small black wings which beat in the air. Some offspring of the beasts who attacked him? Elric could not tell, but Voilodion-Gagnazdiak was plainly terrified of it, trying to drag it from his face. Another figure appeared behind the dwarf. Bright eyes peered from an intelligent face framed by long black hair. He was dressed as ostentatiously as the dwarf, but he was unarmed. He was calling to Elric in the albino strain to catch the words, even as another tiger creature came at him. Corum saw the newcomer now. "Jhary," he shouted. "The one you came to save?" Elric asked. "Aye." Elric made to press forward into the room, but Jhary-a-Conel waved them back. No, stay there." Elric frowned, was about to ask why, when he was attacked from two sides by the tiger creatures and had to retreat, slashing his scythe this way and that. "Link arms," Jhary-a-Conel cried. "Corum in the centre, and you two draw your swords." Elric was panting. He slew another tiger man and felt a new pain shoot through his leg. Blood gushed from his calf. Voilodion-Gagnazdiak was still struggling with the thing which clung to his face. "Hurry," cried Jhary-a-Conel. "It is your only chance, and mine." Elric looked at Corum. "He is wise, my friend," Corum said. "He knows many things which we do not. Here, I will stand in the centre." Jhary-a-Conel linked his brawny arm with Corum's, and Elric did the same on the other side. Jhary-a-Conel drew his sword in his left hand, and Elric brought forth Stormbringer in his right. Something began to happen. A sense of energy came back, and then a sense of great physical well-being. Elric looked at his companions and laughed. It was almost as if by combining their powers they had made themselves 4 times stronger, as if they had become one entity. A peculiar feeling of euphoria filled Elric, and he knew that Jhary-a-Conel had spoken the truth. There were 3 aspects of the same being. "Let us finish them," he shouted, and he saw that they shouted the same. Laughing, the linked 3 strode into the chamber, and now the two swords wounded wherever they struck, slaying swiftly and bringing them more energy still. The winged tiger man became frantic, flapping about the room as the three who were one pursued them. All three were drenched in their own blood and that of their enemies. All three were laughing, invulnerable, acting completely in unison. And as they moved, the room itself began to shake. They heard Volodyon-Gagnazdiak screaming, "The tower! This will destroy the tower!" Ulrich looked up from the last corpse. It was true that the tower was swaying wildly from side to side like a ship in a storm. Jhary-a-Conel pushed past the dwarf and entered the room of death. The sight seemed obnoxious to him, but he controlled his feelings. It is true, the whiskers of the sorceries we have worked today must have its effect. Whiskers, to me. The thing on Volodyon-Gagnazdiak's face flew into the air and settled on Jerry's shoulder. Ulrich saw that it was a small black and white cat, ordinary in every detail, save for the neat pair of wings which it was now folding. Volodyon-Gagnazdiak sat crumpled in the doorway, and he was weeping through sightless eyes. Tears of blood flowed down his handsome face. Ulrich ran back into the other room, breaking his link with Coram. He peered through the window slit, but now there was nothing but a wild eruption of mauve and purple cloud. He gasped. "We are in limbo." Silence fell. Still the tower swayed. The lights were extinguished by a strange wind blowing through the rooms, and the only illumination came from outside where the mist still swirled. Jhary-a-Conel was frowning to himself, and he joined Ulrich at the window. "How did you know what to do?" Ulrich asked him. "I know because I know you, Ulrich of Malnibone, just as I know Jhary-a-Conel there, for I travel in many ages and on many planes, and that is why I am sometimes called companion to champions. I must find my sword in my sack, and also my hat. Doubtless all are in Volodion's vault with his other loot. But the tower, if it is destroyed, shall we too be destroyed?" "A possibility. Come, friend Ulrich, help me seek my hat." "At such a time you look for a hat?" "Aye." Jhary-a-Conel returned to the larger room, stroking the black and white cat. Volodyon-Gagnazdiak was still there, and he was still weeping. "Prince Coram, Lord Jhary-a-Conel, will you come with me too?" Coram and the black giant joined Ulrich, and they squeezed into a narrow passage, inching their way along until it widened to reveal a flight of stairs leading downward. The tower shuddered again. Jhary lit a brand and removed it from the place in the wall. He began to descend the steps, the three heroes behind him. A slab of masonry fell from the roof and crashed just in front of Ulrich. "I would prefer to seek a means of escape from this tower," he said to Jhary-a-Conel. "If it falls now, we shall be buried." "Trust me, Prince Ulrich," was all that Jhary would say. And because Jhary had already shown himself to possess great knowledge, Ulrich allowed the dandy to lead him further into the bowels of the tower. At last they reached a circular chamber, and in it was set a huge metal door. "Volodion's vault," Jhary told them. "Here you will find all the things you seek, and I hope I will find my hat. The hat was specially made, and is the only one which properly matches my other clothes." "Well, how do we open a door like that?" Jhary-a-Conel asked. "It is made of steel, surely." He hefted the black blade he still bore in his left hand. "If you link arms again, my friends," Jhary suggested with a kind of mocking deference, "I will show you how the door may be opened." Once again, Ulrich, Coram, and Jhary-a-Conel linked their arms together. Once again the supernatural strength seemed to flow through them, and they laughed at each other, knowing that they were all part of the same creature. Jhary's voice seemed to come faintly to Ulrich's ears. "And now, Prince Coram, if you would strike with your foot once upon the door." They moved until they were close to the door. That part of them which was Coram struck out with his foot at the slab of steel, and the door fell inward as if it was made of the lightest wood. And this time Ulrich was much more reluctant to break the link which held them. But he did so at last as Jhary stepped into the vault, chuckling to himself. The tower lurched. All three were flung after Jhary into Voilodion's vault. Ulrich fell heavily against a great golden chair of a kind he had seen once used as an elephant saddle. He looked around the vault. It was full of valuables, clothes, shoes, weapons. He felt nauseated as he realized that these had been the possessions of all those Voilodion had chosen to call his guests. Jhary pulled a bundle from under a pile of furs. "Look, Prince Ulrich, these are what you will need where Tanalorn is concerned." It seemed to be a bunch of long sticks rolled in thin sheets of metal. Ulrich accepted the heavy bundle. "What is it?" "They are banners of bronze and the arrows of quartz, useful weapons against the reptilian men of Pio and their mounts." "You know of those reptiles? You know of Thalebkana too?" "The sorcerer of Pantang. Aye." Ulrich stared almost suspiciously at Jhary-a-Conel. "How can you know all this?" "I have told you. I have lived many lives as a friend of heroes. Unwrap this bundle when you return to Tanalorn. Use the arrows of quartz like spears. To use the banners of bronze, merely unfoil them." "Aha!" Jhary reached behind a sack of jewels and came up with a somewhat dusty hat. He smacked off the dust and placed it on his head. He bent again, and, displaying a goblet, he offered this to Prince Coram. "Take it. It will prove useful, I think." From another corner, Jhary took a small sack and put it on his shoulder. Almost as an afterthought, he hunted about in a chest of jewels and found a gleaming ring of unnameable stones and peculiar metal. "This is your reward, Jhary-a-Conel, in helping to free me from my captor." Jhary-a-Conel smiled. "I have the feeling you needed no help, young man." "Oh, you are mistaken, friend Jhary-a-Conel. I doubt if I have ever been in greater peril." He looked vaguely about the vault, staggering as the floor tilted alarmingly. Ulrich said, "We should take steps to leave." "Exactly." Jhary-a-Conel crossed swiftly to the far side of the vault. "The last thing. In his pride, Voilodion showed me his possessions, but he did not know the value of all of them." "What do you mean?" asked the prince in the scarlet robe. "He killed the traveller who brought this with him." The traveller was right in assuming he had the means to stop the tower from vanishing, but he did not have time to use it before Voilodion had slayed him. Jhary picked up a small staff coloured a dull ochre. "Here it is. The rune staff. Hawkmoon had this with him when I travelled with him to the Dark Empire." Noticing their puzzlement, Jhary-a-Conel, companion to champions, apologised. "I'm sorry. I sometimes forget that not all of us have memories of other careers." "What is the rune staff?" Coram asked. "I remember one description, but I am poor at naming and explaining things." "That had not escaped my notice," Ulrich said, almost smiling. "It is an object which can only exist under a certain set of spatial and temporal laws. In order to continue to exist, it must exert a field in which it can contain itself. That field must accord with those laws, the same laws under which we survive." More masonry fell. "The tower is breaking up," Jhary-a-Conel growled. Jhary stroked the dull ochre staff. "Please gather near me, my friends." The three heroes stood around him, and then the roof of the tower fell in. But it did not fall on them, for they stood suddenly on firm ground, breathing fresh air. But there was blackness all around them. "Do not step outside this small area," Jhary warned, "or you will be doomed. Let the rune staff seek what we seek." They saw the ground change colour, breathed warmer, then colder air. It was as if they moved from plane to plane of the universe, never seeing more than a few feet of ground upon which they stood. And then there was harsh desert, and beneath their feet, and Jhary shouted, "Now!" and the four of them rushed out of the area into the blackness to find themselves suddenly in sunlight beneath a sky like beaten metal. "A desert," Jhary-a-Conel murmured. "A vast desert." Jhary smiled. "Do you not recognize it, friend Ulrich?" Is it the Sighing Desert? Listen. And sure enough, Elric heard the familiar sounds of the wind as it made its mournful passage across the sands. A little way away he saw the runestaff where they had left it. Then it was gone. Are you all to come with me to the defence of Tanalorn? He asked Jhary. Jhary shook his head. No, we go the other way. We go to seek the device Thalab-Kana activated with the help of the Lords of Chaos. Where lies it? Elric tried to get his bearings. He lifted a hesitant finger. That way, I think? Well then, and let us go to it now. But I must try to help Tanalorn. You must destroy the device after we have used it, friend Elric, lest Thalab-Kana or his like try to activate it again. But Tanalorn. I do not believe that Thalab-Kana and his beasts have yet reached the city. Not reached it. So much time has passed. Less than a day. Elric rubbed at his face, and he said reluctantly, Very well. I will take you to the machine. But if Tanalorn lies so near, Coram said to Jhary, why seek it elsewhere? Because this is not the Tanalorn we wish to find, Jhary told him. Well, it will suit me, Jhary-a-Conel said. I will remain with Elric. Then, perhaps. A look almost of terror spread over Jhary's features then. He said sadly, My friend, already much of time and space is threatened with destruction. Eternal barriers could soon fall. The fabric of the multiverse could decay. You do not understand. Such a thing as has happened in the Vanishing Tower can only happen once in an eternity, and even then it is dangerous to all concerned. You must do as I say. I promise that you will have just as good a chance of finding Tanalorn where I take you. Jhary-a-Conel bowed his head. Very well. Come, Elric said impatiently, beginning to strike off to the northeast. For all your talk of time, there is precious little left for me.